This is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined as always by my co-host, Brian Solomon. How's it going, Brian?
Going very well, Al. Happy to be here, as always.
Yes, and we've got a special guest with us joining this week, and we're all on video because we're going to be talking about visuals. It is the art director for Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, Laura Brubaker. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I specially requested you years ago. We had Ken Morgan, who's kind of an icon for wrestling magazines. He was the art director for the PWI and the family of magazines in the 80s and 90s. And it was such a fun conversation talking about what goes into putting one of these covers together. And that's why we wanted to have you back on. We're going to be talking with you in just a moment.
I did listen to that episode. It was really interesting.
Yeah, super fun. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we got a lot to talk about in addition to that, Brian. I mean, I don't think it's exaggeration to say one of the biggest stories, wrestling stories, certainly of our lifetime, really ever, with the departure of Vince McMahon and all the fallout of it, all the changes. And we'll certainly get into that in just a moment. We're going to be joined by our editor, Kevin McElvaney, for that conversation in just a bit. And we also, by the way, have one of the biggest shows of the year coming up in just a few days, SummerSlam. So we'll do a little a SummerSlam preview, also kind of through the lens of WWE after Vince McMahon. So stick around for all of that. But first, let's talk about the magazine, PWI. And I've got the latest issue. I think you got it. It's actually on the wall behind you there.
Yes, we got it.
October 2022, right? And we've got Thunder Rosa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of my favorite covers I've ever done.
It's a great one. Yeah. I think Brian and I before here were both going through covers to see what were some of our favorite. And I think both of us, two of our favorite covers are the last two covers. And maybe it speaks to kind of like getting into groove. How long you been with the magazines now?
I've been doing pro wrestling since the April 2019 issue. But I've been here at Kappa since March of 2018.
And fair to say, you're not a wrestling fan, right?
No, I know absolutely nothing about wrestling besides what I've acquired by osmosis working on that magazine.
So what's the process been over the last, 3 years? And I talked about, these last couple covers. Again, it feels like you're really kind of like finding your groove. Can you talk about sort of putting together a cover now versus when you first got here 3 years ago?
Yeah, of course. I have my first cover I ever done here. It's this one with Becky Lynch on the cover. For this cover, I did a lot of research. I looked at a lot of previous covers to see what other artists have done and what I thought it might look like in my own style. So Stu, I believe, it was me and Stu, and he gave me the photo and the verbiage, the copy on the cover, and what my usual process for working on a cover is I choose like a main color. Like for instance, this one was orange and yellow. It paired well with Becky's hair. And I pick some complementary colors like blue, etc. And I find fonts and copy that look good with the copy. And I kind of, through trial and error, make different versions of the cover until I find something that looks good.
Yeah.
It's way more fun than Sudoku, right? I mean,
I was going to ask. I mean, what is the job outside of wrestling magazines? What were you doing before here? Because that's a lot of what Kappa does, right? It's like the puzzle magazines.
Yeah, we do a lot of the puzzle magazines, but we also do kids' activity books, kids' coloring books, and I've done covers for those. We also have another magazine here that I work on as well sometimes, but I'm responsible for the entirety of the design of wrestling. So, and I've been doing that, the entire magazine since 2019. So
is when you sit down to design a cover, how much of it are you on your own? How much of it is collaborating now with Kevin or with Stu, when you first got here, do they give you kind of an idea? We'd like it to look something like that, and then you take it from there?
Sometimes they'll give me ideas of, hey, here's an idea that would look really cool. Maybe we can take it in this direction, and I'll take their advice and I'll mold it into something that both of us would like it looks nice and it fit the theme that they wanted. I've done that quite a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And Brian, what are, I know you have handy another one that you're fond of from the last couple of years.
Yes, I love this. I love this because it's such a shout out to the old school PWI covers of like the 80s and early 90s, especially like the frame here. This was such a call out for me because that was, I forget when they got rid of that, but I think it was like somewhere in the mid 90s. And I remember at the time, I kind of was glad because I was like, oh, that frame, it takes up too much space, this more real estate. But when I saw it back like this, I was like, oh, I missed it.
Exactly.
I missed that frame. It's such a cool way to do a cover,
Yeah. And when I interviewed Ken Morgan, and you say listen to that recently, I believe he talked about doing that essentially freehand. I mean, like that's no, I mean, I don't know how you did it now, but I mean, back in the day, that was Ken and a ruler.
Yeah. I'm only vaguely familiar with what publishing and printing was like before the age of computers. But what they did with the tools they had is just amazing.
Yeah.
Were there specific covers at all that, I mean, I'm talking about for this one, and this is, if people are looking for the back issue, it's the October 2021 issue. This actually got, I'm sure you know this, but they put this on TV. AEW Dynamite put this on TV. They had the big blow up and everything. Were there specific old covers that you looked at to kind of get a feel for what it should look like?
Yes, there was one specific old cover that Kevin gave me to reference that I used as an inspiration for that cover. And there was another one for this one right here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There is another cover I referenced for that one as well. And we've done that a couple of times. It's really fun to do the throwback ones because it's taking a cover that was made years ago and putting a modern spin on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's interesting from your perspective because you get like old school fans like Brian and I, and we see those, and it instantly takes us back, and it's almost like doesn't matter artistically or design wise what's better. It's just nostalgia. But for you, do you? I mean, how well do you think those work? Those kind of old school ones, collage style, versus some of the more modern stuff that you could do, kind of like the Thunder Rosa Jade one behind you. The design wise, artistically, which do you like better?
That's hard to say because they both have their own pros and cons. They're more retro white ones. They look really neat, not just neat, cool, but neat, like everything's organized type of way, which is really important for the front cover of a magazine. The more design covers, sometimes they're usually more eye-catching, which is good too. But I think that you can take a retro type cover like that one, put a modern spin on it, and make it just as eye-catching as just like a regular, more with lots of special effects and stuff type of cover, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're both styles are great in their own way, and PWI, for a lot of fans and readers, even for a lot of current readers, it's a nostalgia brand, and there's an aspect of it that they love. Like every time I wear I don't have it today because it's in the wash, but every time I wear my Pro Wrestling Illustrated t-shirt, if I go to a show or a signing or something, I will always get people who are like, oh my God, and they come over and they start talking to me, and because it's something they remember from when they were young. Like it just kind of generates that like warm feeling, and I just think the way that one thing that I love, and this is a non sequitur, but about the PWI covers, and I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like it's something that we always avoid doing, and I'm glad, because as somebody that used to run a magazine, it was always a huge pet peeve of mine when the magazine logo is covered. It drives me crazy. And you'll see the biggest, most famous magazines will do it. And it's one thing when it's like just a little bit or whatever, but sometimes they'll do it to the point where you can't even tell what the title of the magazine is. And I think it's so presumptuous to do that. I don't understand why it's done. And I'm so glad we never do it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was explained to me right from the start. You can cover up a little bit of the logo, but there's a certain amount where I can't cover it up. And honestly, that's obviously important because people have to look at it right now. Oh, it's Pro Wrestling Illustrated, you know?
You know, I've never even noticed that now that you pointed out, and I got to say, to some extent, I kind of like it when because it gives that sense of dimension, right? Like they're
not when
they're
it
standing in front of it.
the title though. That's what I like when it's like maybe a little lip over it. But I remember like when I'd be doing it, didn't really happen with WWE magazine because we had it in the corner where you can't really do. But when we had Raw and SmackDown, I would go to war with the layout people because the whole thing, you couldn't even tell what it was. It would get to a point and I would just, that's why I noticed it, because it was always a personal pet peeve because I'm strange, but you know.
No.
Yeah, it's interesting talking to people who are really kind of intimately involved in this. So Brian, how much communication would you have with the art people over in WWE Magazine or Raw Magazine about the covers?
Well, technically, it's weird because WWE would play fast and loose with titles and everybody was sort of like a jack of all trades. So technically my title was managing editor, which really is only supposed to be the person that supervises the traffic, making sure that everything's moving around and the copy editors are seeing everything and the photo stuff is coming in. But it really was more of an editor-in-chief role. So, I was pretty closely plugged in. I would sit down with the designers and we would talk about like what we wanted. I would trust them to do their job. I wasn't like micromanaging, but we would sort of touch base as to like the feel we were going for. And a lot of times we were dealing with new photography, like specifically shot for the cover, which is a blessing that you can't always take for granted. Right. But I would have input, but in the end, I trusted them to do their job. And then I might have input or feedback and things that I would have to say about it when it was done. But I generally trusted them.
And that was always, for me, growing up reading both the Weston magazines and WWE magazine, one of the big differences was the covers, and the WWE covers typically being studio shots posed, one person, and kind of like a very clean background, maybe like a slate background, and then PWI and those magazines, more action shots. The occasional posed shot, but it was more kind of like what you have behind you there. Over the last 2 years, certainly with AEW, but even WWE's cooperated a couple times. We've been able to do some of those studio shots. One of my favorites, Sasha and Bailey. I think you had that there, right, Alara? Sasha and Bailey, the women's 100.
This one?
Yeah, great shot, right? One of my favorites. For you, is there a preference, and what are kind of the pros and cons of working with a studio shot posed for PWI versus going through whatever we have in the way of action shots, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say definitely post shots tend to be really, really great, fantastic, high quality. They always come in, usually color looks good, DPI looks good. Action shots, they're obviously taken by professionals, but can be a bit harder for an action shot to be the correct, looking crisp enough for a cover, because it's going to be blown up pretty big too. So in action shots, I'm trying to find one with an action shots, but I don't really have one here with me. They can be a little tricky to fit into a cover, whereas post shots, they're usually taking pictures with a composition in mind. Like, see, this is pretty. Right. This is like a rectangle, but action.
You're covering some of the logo there.
Huh?
They're covering some of
just a little.
That is about the amount I'm allowed to cover. With the Becky one.
Yeah, see, that's very much like a WWE magazine cover style,
Yeah, but her head's covering more than I thought. I remember putting on there, but surprised there.
But you can still totally tell what magazine it is. There's no question what magazine it is.
So yeah, action shots can be really super dynamic. but they can be trickier to fit into the layout of a cover with everything else that's going on, like the headlines and whatever else the cover needs.
We would very rarely use action shots on a cover. In fact, I think the only one that immediately pops to mind was when they had Vader, I guess it was the cover.
That, yeah. Those early Raw magazines.
The first Raw had a Vader action shot, and it stood out because it was an action shot. You never saw an action shot on the cover of WWE.
Wasn't it black and white, but for the blood or something?
Yeah. And I remember that there was a shot they did of Yokozuna pinning Hulk Hogan, which was a huge deal. Mm-hmm. That was a cover. They made that a cover because they were like in full burial mode of Hulk Hogan, so they had to do that. But it's hard to do cover action shots on the cover. I remember something I would always come into conflict with at WWE because I grew up reading these magazines. I had that whole attitude of like, oh, the WWF magazines are for kids. Like they're like the sanitized, the London magazines, the After magazines, like those are like the real deal magazines. And so I would, their style at WWE was always very, everything was retouched because also they had the budget to do it. Absolutely everything was retouched. They hated action shots where they were always so caught up with people looking like the talent looking bad in action shots, like looking, if there's too much sweat, there's too much shine, they're making a weird face. And I'm going like, PWI always uses shots like that. They look great because it looks like sports photography. Like not everybody's going to look like a perfect model when they're in the middle of a wrestling match, and it was just, I had the PWI philosophy. They had the, like polished, super polished WWE philosophy.
One of my favorite covers, maybe my very favorite cover, and it's one of the few framed magazines I have up, is The Ultimate Warrior when he won the championship at WrestleMania 6. And I got the Warrior to sign it some years ago. It's the ultimate victory, and it's the Warrior standing on the top turnbuckle with both belts. A great looking cover. And interestingly, WWE ran the same photo pretty much. They put out kind of their own version of that same photo on the cover. So an action shot, but different background. They put in like a purple background with lightning and all this stuff. But I guess that's one of the rare times where, we ran essentially the same cover. Are there other, I'll ask you both, covers that come to mind all time that you love? I remember being at an event with Stu some years ago, and I think we held a poll for what was the greatest cover of all time, and then we had it blown up there, and it was the Four Horsemen was the one that I think that was the one, and there was also one with a bunch of Crockett wrestlers reaching for the Crockett Cup. Remember that one?
I do remember those. I think I blew those up for our conference.
Yeah. Which are some that you've seen maybe before your time that really caught your eye?
Well, I printed out some, like too many, I think. But this one caught my eye.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Keep in mind, this is from an outsider perspective, so I'm not commenting on the wrestlers themselves, just like the color scheme. This was the first time they used a background color that wasn't red or blue or yellow. The purple is really striking. It goes well with his cape.
What's the date on that?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the date on that?
1982, December 1982. Yeah. And they use the space really well, the negative space. Everything's really readable. I just like that. I just like that one a lot.
I'm guessing that was probably timed with Rocky 3, I'm imagining.
Yeah,
especially
that was
82. Yeah.
Have some other ones that I like. It was interesting to go through the archives and see, I can like pinpoint where they switched over to digital.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because here's another one I liked.
Oh yeah.
I love that one. Yes.
Really great. The gold looks really great. There's that frame again.
That's the famous missing robe, right? That finally turned up a year or two ago.
Yeah, that's the one that he wore a lot. He wore a lot in his WWF run, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great cover.
This one's 1992. I believe they were still using the transfer fonts because the logos had the logo here had a very certain look to it. And then when things started to become digital, we started seeing this kind of logo with the gradients and the use.
I don't love that.
You don't love that?
I remember noticing at some point, and maybe it was the digital switchover, that the line that ran through the letters in the logo went away. Like it's gone. At one point there used to be a line running through all the letters.
That's huge. I think that's pinpointing where.
Yeah.
Like I just printed I kind of like this one because of the use of color. And I think this might be one of the first digital type covers with the gradient.
What's the year on that? Because I'm trying to figure out if it was around the same time the WWE magazines went digital too.
1997.
That's about it. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. About 90, maybe 96 for WWE. Because when I got there in 2000, they actually still had, they were totally digital. They were using Quark back then. But if you would poke your head into like a closet or something, you would see all the drawing boards. They had just stuffed in the closet, like with the X-Acto knives and everything and the giant rulers. I mean, they were doing it all by hand still as recently as maybe 3 years before I got there. Yeah.
This one's 1996. And this is a digital type cover, I believe. I like this one.
Yeah.
It's very busy.
It is busy, but not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah.
It's a little dark because our printer prints dark. But you can see the copy. You can tell most of the wrestlers apart, but some are like in there kind of getting lost, but
before digital, and if that was before digital, and certainly we had other covers. I mean, would that literally be a matter of like cutting photos out with scissors?
I'm assuming so. Yes, which sounds very, very tedious and requires a really precise hand.
That reminds me of one of my favorite covers. I don't know if you remember this one, Brian, and it wasn't PWI. It might have been The Wrestler, I think, and it was when Flair just signed to come over to WWE, and they did a cover with Hogan dropping a leg on Flair. I mean, essentially Photoshop 30-something
with Piper in the back. Piper in the background.
I forgot that Piper was there. Yeah, but it was at the time that was like mind blowing, like to have that image of, and they would do stuff like that every once in a while, combining photos. Another one. I mean, this was a WWF one. Probably the best example, the most famous example of like trick photography. The whole, and this was a whole feud, right? Savage and Flair leading into WrestleMania 8, where they ran those photos of Flair and Liz having an affair, and then months later revealed that it was essentially Photoshop and that was originally Randy Savage in those photos. And all these years later, they look perfect to me. I mean, I'm still not positive how they did that.
I'm guessing the way they did it. I should have asked people when I was there, but I'm guessing the way they did it was they shot. No, I think it was even more simple than that. I think they shot it all at one time. And what they probably did was they had the same setup and they literally just had Savage and Flair standing by and Elizabeth holding the same pose.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
And just doing the picture twice. And they probably took 1 million of them to make sure they got them as identical as possible. I think it was as simple as that. I don't think there was any trick to it at all. I think it was as simple as that. They shot it all at one time and they had everybody there.
Those are fun. Another one, as far as PWI, and this might lead into another conversation of using artwork, so not photos, but paintings. The most memorable one I can remember was leading into WrestleMania 7, that illustration of Hulk Hogan, just gigantic, right, with the American flag. And I think there've been shirts and stuff made out of that. What are some of the pros and cons of working with other artists? And I know we've done it over the last few years. I can remember a Seth Rollins cover, I think, over for the 500. I think we did Roman some years back. Brian Danielson, we had a really like dynamic painting a few years back. So do you like working with other artists?
Yeah, it's really cool to work with other artists, incorporate their illustrations into the magazine. The most recent one I could think of was a illustration of around 4 wrestlers. I can't remember which ones, but each one had a specific color and it looked really cool. I should have printed that one out because it's one of my favorites. It turned out looking really great. That's the most recent one. I think that was last year or the year before. I was here when we did the Seth Rollins one. That one was really cool too. And it's really nice, really cool to work with other creatives, especially illustrators, and they're doing something a little different than design. So it's interesting to ask sometimes I ask for their input and see if they have any ideas for what they'd like the cover to look like. And it's really interesting to work collaboratively and find a cover that really suits their illustration.
We're talking a lot about covers, but obviously you do more than just the covers. What are some of the challenges inside of the magazine when now you've got to work around our text, the stuff that we write up, and do those create unique challenges if we've written too much, too little, and you got to kind of squeeze photos around there, all that?
Well, usually like 90% of the time when I'm giving copy and photos, I usually don't have a problem fitting everything in. I don't think I go back and ask Kevin if some copy can be cut very often. I can't, I could count the many times I did that on one hand, because I can reduce the space between letters, between words. Sometimes if in extreme cases, I can lower the font, but I do like the font size to be consistent throughout the magazine. Photos can be resized, cropped. So there is a lot of things I can do to make sure everything gets on the page that needs to be on the page. But every so often, I will ask Kevin if the writer can cut some words or if we can cut this photo, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you got Brian, right? Long-winded Brian.
What's that?
Wow, talking about Brian, right?
yeah, it's always me. Listen, I hit my word counts to the number. Do you happen to know what the name of the font is that we use? I was wondering about that.
We use Helvetica.
Helvetica. All right, yeah, because we used on WWF magazines, we used Futura, especially when it was like very kiddie. We used Futura, and then I think we wound up just going with Times New Roman, I'm pretty sure, especially when we were trying to go for like a more, I don't know, uniform look or something. But another thing I remember is with the designers, we would always, because I started as a copy editor more even before I was a writer. So I would be like going through, like you're talking about the kerning and getting the words to fit and all that. And I always remember like some of the designers, their interests and concerns were purely visual. So of how it looked. And then you had the copy editors that our number one concern was how it read and the meaning. And sometimes we would clash because in the layout, we would go like, this is clearly laid out by somebody who didn't even read this, because like the words are just all over the place. And we would have to go, can we make this change here so that it looks beautiful? It looks fantastic, but it's totally unreadable. And that never happens with PWI. Thankfully, it's like top to bottom. It looks fantastic always. I'm not just saying that because you're here, but it's like purely readable, because that would always be a concern, is they would just go, you know what? It looks great. Like with the, wrapped around this strange shape. And it was like, it would drive a reader crazy. And I remember sometimes they would even say to me, oh, no one's going to read it anyway. Who cares? It just has to look good. I'm like, what? That's my whole job. Yeah, so that's the struggle.
Yeah, I do try. Readability is a big concern for me when I design. So there's a set of rules that most editorial dentors live by. No widows, which is one word at the end of a paragraph. No orphans, which is one sentence that on the top of a page and the rest of the paragraph is on the other page. I don't squish words more than a certain amount unless it loses readability
or just strange breaks in words.
Yeah, strange. Right? Sometimes sometimes Kevin has to help me fix the strange breaks because I won't even notice them, but he's good about catching the weird breaks, or if something isn't reading correctly that I miss, which is great because it takes more than one set of eyes to make this look good.
How about something, I mean, you talk about readability, and then you get like this mammoth project like the PWI 500, which we're putting together right now, whatever it is, 40, 50 pages of just text of 500 little bios. What are, from a design perspective, a production perspective, some unique challenges with the PWI 500?
Well, these big sections like this, they're actually not as bad as you think. I will design what I want the layout to look like ahead of time. And I can use my Adobe software to apply the layout to every single page. So I don't have to create every page from scratch every time. So I could, so that the layout already exists. So I can take the copy and the photos and rearrange them to suit that particular page. So that with the use of the design software, I can do that, and it's really handy.
Yeah.
And it helps when people get all their stuff in really early, right?
Are you done, Brian?
I'm done.
Are you done already? Oh my God, I haven't started.
I'm done. Well, I do it. It's not just conscientiousness. It's because I've got 80 billion other things I'm working on. So it's just like triage for me. Like I'm trying to just get things off the table because there's other things, at the same time, but it benefits everybody in the end.
Yeah, I gotta get started. Now you're freaking me out when I get off this call.
Sorry. If I believe Kevin, there's still plenty of time.
Yeah,
there's at least a couple of weeks left, which in editor speak means like twice that much, but
Right. All right, Laura, thank you so much. This was such a treat. I mean, this is an aspect of the magazines that I think sometimes are taken for granted, even by us. I mean, like us, you touched on something, Brian, that I think is very true, that for as much as, we think about the stuff we write and what story should we do, and we kind of agonize over this, so much of why people come to the magazines is the visuals, the photos. I know growing up as a little kid and devouring these magazines, I wasn't reading a whole lot of them. I would pick them up and I'd flip through it and look at the really cool pictures and that kind of stuff. So it really is, and especially when you talk about something like a print magazine, something that you hold in your hand, so much of it is how awesome they look. And this is just great. I mean, I feel like we're entering another kind of golden age of design for the magazine with some of the stuff you've been doing lately, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very true, because honestly, like not to denigrate what we do, but in terms of making a magazine special, the text is the least important part. And I only say that because, and it's very hard for me to say that, but I say it because when you're competing with the web, right, and you want something to be unique and different and something you can't get, it comes to visuals, it comes to photography and the way things look. I mean, people can read every article under the sun that they want. They can't read our articles, but they can read similar articles, but they can't get, this kind of beautiful stuff. So it's very important.
It's kind of what elevates it to art.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when I listened to the episode with Ken Morgan on, and he's explained why when he designs a cover, he designs it so when somebody looks at that cover, for the fraction of a second it takes for a person to recognize the cover, that's what he designs for, so people will look at it and buy it. And that's exactly my exact same process when I design a cover. So I thought it was interesting how that hasn't changed throughout designers over the years.
The reality is that people could be reading these magazines for years and years, and I say read and never really have read anything in it, but they remember those covers. It hits them, that second as soon as you see it on the newsstand for the first time, and that's so much of the decision of whether you buy it or not. I know. I mean, and that gets into decisions of even who you put on the cover. I mean, I remember talking to Ken about that, and even Stu over the years. That's why Hulk Hogan was on so many covers. But even that you got to be mindful of is like, is there kind of like Hulk Hogan overload here? And do we? So that's all fast. That's another cool thing that certainly I've seen in the last few years, and I think is one of Kevin's kind of signatures is experimenting with different people on the cover who you might not think of, would be on covers of magazines, and even doing some fun stuff with digital exclusive editions. I remember putting Lulu Pencil on the cover of
I remember that one
of 500, and we've done that with a few different wrestlers over the years. So yeah, it's cool to see us having a lot of fun, and obviously you're key to that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope I can make the covers for this magazine as awesome as I possibly can, even though I know very little of the content.
Have you learned much? I mean, would you call yourself even a moderate fan these days?
I don't know about that. I'm just not super into sports in general. So I understand very little about any kind of sports. But it's really fun to look through the magazine and read about the different wrestlers and what they're doing, and what happened to this guy. He was champ last week and now he's not. It's just fun to read about. And as far as designing for content, I mean, it could do a lot worse. I have a lot of fun with the magazine. I get creative freedom to use as many loud colors as I want, which is awesome. So I would say maybe I'm like a beginner fan, maybe.
And I would think it is one of the cool things about working for PWI when you compare it to something like a People magazine or something like that, is that maybe it is a little looser, right? It's not as sort of rigid, what maybe some of like the policies or styles are. I mean, you look at something like that cover behind you with Thunder Rosa and Jade Cargill, and I can't think of many magazines from covering whatever that would put together something kind of so bold and colorful and fun. Yeah, that cover was really fun to do. I went into it, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and it kind of morphed into what you see behind me. So, when I went into it, I didn't know I was going to do like all those colors type of cover, but it turned out great. So yeah. All right, Laura, we've kept you long enough. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Laura. Great talking to you.